Hey YouTube, NC Shootist here. Wanted to bring you a video today on how to change the front brake pads on a 2011 Toyota Sienna. And let's go ahead, before we get started, we want to make sure that we've set the emergency brake, jacked up the vehicle, and you want to make sure that you don't just use a floor jack. Make sure you use jack stands, and make sure you chock the back wheels. So I like to do all three of those: emergency brake, jack stands, and chock the wheels. It can keep you from getting seriously injured. So what we'll go over now is the parts list of what we'll need to do this brake job. So one is a socket wrench with a 14mm socket on it. You'll need, strangely enough, an 11/16 wrench, open-end wrench, to be able to get to the nut on the front side of the caliper. You'll need a good flat blade screwdriver to pry out the old brake shoes or brake pads. You'll need some kind of clamping device to be able to reset the pots on the caliper before you put it back on. And of course, let's see, you'll also need some kind of twine or wire to tie up the calipers to make sure the brake line doesn't get kinked and cracked. And lastly, our new brake pads. So I got these at O'Reilly, picked up the Brake Best Select. These are actually pretty close to the OEM, and they're ceramic. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, after you take the wheel off, you'll notice two nuts that hold the calipers on. So here's one of them at the top. Okay, and we'll pan down. Here's the lower one. We'll go ahead and remove both of those. Now I've already gone ahead and loosened this one. So what you'll need to do, here's the inner nut. You'll want to put your 11/16 wrench on that. Okay, take your socket, get onto that nut on the back, and hold your open end wrench as you take this nut off the back. Okay, and we'll repeat that procedure on the bottom one as well. Okay, we've got our open end wrench in place. Go ahead and break that one loose. Alright, now we should be able to pull the caliper off and move it up and out of the way. Alright, so now that we've got it off, I'll go ahead and take some wire and we'll wire it up out of the way, so that way we don't kink or tear our brake line. Okay, now here's what I like to do when I'm replacing the brakes is go ahead and wire that caliper assembly up to the spring, up to your suspension springs. So that helps keep it up and out of the way. And you can see our brake line is not being stressed. So that's pretty important. All right, the next thing we're going to do is take out the old pads. Okay, you'll see these two retaining springs here. You'll notice that the wishbone end points down on top and points up on the bottom. All right, so what we're going to do is just take these guys out. Now, if your brake pads did not come with a replacement set of these, you'll be sure to want to hold on to these, okay? Now, if you go with the Brake Best from O'Reilly, and I'm sure Advance has a brand that they have, you know, sometimes they'll come with those retaining springs. So you'll want to, like I said, if you don't have them, hang on to the old ones. If your new brakes do have them, you can use those. All right, so now we'll go ahead and pop the brake pads out. So here's where your flat blade screwdriver will come in handy. You just want to gently pry those brake pads out of there, and they'll go ahead and slide right out. Okay, and you can see there's the old brake pad, and it's getting down to about 4 millimeters. And I'll show you here in a second what the old brake pad versus the new brake pad looks like. Okay, we'll go ahead and pry the backside out. Okay, there's the other side. So now what I'll do is go ahead and get the brake pads and prep them for all the new hardware, and we'll get them put back on. All right, before we put the brake pads on, let's go ahead and take these clips out. I've already loosened this one up on the bottom. So we'll take that old one out. We'll take the new one, and we'll snap it into place. Make sure it doesn't touch the rotor. This little tab right here should make sure that it doesn't slide back too far and touch the rotor. Okay, we'll go ahead and take the top one out here. Get my screwdriver. Okay, we'll go ahead and pop that old clip out. Okay, we'll go ahead and pop the top one in. Okay, so now you've got the new brake retainer springs in place. Let's go ahead and get the new hardware put on the brakes. Okay, here's where your old brake shoes will come in handy, at least one way. Okay, you see that little tab on the top there? Okay, what you want to do is take your new brake shoe, get your new tab, and slip the tab on the top. If I can get it here, it's kind of fiddly. Alright, so you'll snap that in top, just like the old one. Okay, and now you can see kind of the difference in the braking material. So this is about 4 millimeters, and this is a new one that's about 12 millimeters. So let's go ahead and get the rest of the hardware snapped onto the discs or the brake pads, and then we'll go ahead and set everything back in. Okay, now is also a good time to inspect your rotors. So this one's pretty smooth, not a lot of pitting on it, so I think we should be good. We don't need to get the rotors turned by a machine shop. So what we want to do now is go ahead and snap the new brake pad in. Okay, and you want to be sure not to get a lot of dirt and grime on your rotors or on the brake pad. That can really affect the braking ability. So what you want to do is go ahead and snap the lower part in. Okay, and then snap the upper clip in. Okay, and there you go. There's your caliper installed on one side, and we'll go ahead and get the caliper installed on the other side. Okay, we've already got our clips in on the other side, so let's go ahead and snap this brake pad in. Okay, so now we've got both of our brake pads snapped in, and now what we want to do is go ahead and compress the calipers and make sure they're at the bottom of their stroke, and that way we can set the calipers on the new thicker brake pads to make sure we have clearance. Alright, now here's where having the adjustable clamp will come in handy. What you want to do is take your old brake pad, okay, set it over top of the pots. Okay, then take your clamp, and what you're going to want to do is just clamp down, and you'll see those pots start to go back to bottom. Okay, because what happens is they'll work their way out as the brake pads get worn. Okay, and you can see those are pretty much about bottom center. So we'll go ahead and unwire the caliper and get it set back on to the brakes. Okay, and actually before we go ahead and set the caliper back on, let's go ahead and get some brake grease. And what you want to do is take a dab of this, okay, and you'll want to put it on the backing plate of the inner and the outer brake pads. Okay, this will keep everything lubricated, stop it from squealing. Okay, so now let's unwire the caliper housing and get it set back in place. Okay, we'll also want to go ahead and inspect these caliper pins that the bolts screw into. Okay, so we want to make sure there's a lot of grease on them and that they look to be in good shape. Okay, and now we'll go ahead and put the dust boot back up on it. Okay, we'll go ahead and compress both of those. Okay, we've got our both of our brake pads in, and we've got the caliper pulled down back to where it should be. Okay, and we'll go ahead and reinstall our retainer clips for the brake shoes. And this is always, to me, the trickiest part of the job, because you've got to keep everything in place and then try to put the caliper back on. Okay, so I'll go ahead and keep everything in place with my left hand, and then we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and try to squeeze everything in with my right hand. Okay, I'll get the caliper in place. There we go. All right, now we've got the caliper mounted on. And what I like to do before I put the bolts back in is to apply some anti-seize compound to the bolts before I put them back in, because these brakes, they see a lot of heat, a lot of friction, so you want to make sure that these bolts don't get welded into the holes that they thread into. All right, so we'll go ahead and get that threaded back on, and we'll get everything tightened up here. All right, when you're tightening up your caliper bolts, you want to make sure you don't over tighten. Okay, if you snap this piece, let me get it adjusted here. If you snap this piece off, that's going to be a very expensive fix. You're going to be buying a new caliper. So what you want to do, put your adjustable wrench on it, okay, and basically you'll want to just get it hand tight. You don't want to apply a lot of pressure. Just kind of get it on there and get it tightened up. Okay, and snug is about all you need. Okay, you don't want to do much more than that. The brakes will do that themselves. So let's go ahead and get the wheel put back on, and we'll go ahead and pump our brakes a couple times to build the pressure back up, and then we'll be done. All right guys, we've got the caliper put back on, we've got the wheel put back on, we've taken the car down off the jacks. Okay, we've taken the chocks out of the back. So now what we want to do, we'll go ahead and we're going to put some pressure back in the brakes. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start the car up. Okay, and we'll want to go ahead and brakes. Okay, and you know, the first couple times it's going to go all the way to the floor. Okay, but as you get pressure built back up, okay, the brake pedal is going to come back up for you. Okay, and you want to make sure you do this before you take it out and drive it, or otherwise you're going to get a big surprise when you go to hit the brakes for the first time and they go all the way to the floor. I appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and love to have you as a subscriber, and see you next time. Thanks, and God bless.